Hello, folks. So it's it's customary to always say it's an honor to introduce a guest speaker, and I suppose it always is. But I think unbeknownst to many of us, we have one of the world's leading experts on energy work, and that is Rich Coward, who's going to be talking this morning about the clean heat standard. Rich has deep experience on state and national energy issues across the US, across Europe, and China, and other nations, with a focus on climate policy for the last decade. He's launched and directed RAP, regulatory assistance projects, European programs from 2009 to 2018, served a decade on the executive committee of the International Energy Agency's demand-side management program, appointed to 3 terms as chair of the Electric Advisory Committee of the United States Department of Energy, and his recent work focuses on power markets, climate policy, and energy efficiency programs throughout Europe. An experienced regulator closer to home, Mr. Coward served as commissioner and chair of the Public Service Board from 1986 to 1999. Been elected to president of the New England Conference of Public Utility Commissioners, chair of the U.S. Regulators Committee on Energy Resources and the Environment, and for 4 years as chair of the National Council on Competition in the Electric Industry. The list of important work and degrees, programs, et cetera, goes on, but we have really with us an outstanding expert who has contributed, not just here to speak on this now, but he's also done a lot of work off stage outside the legislative session to prepare the bill that has come over to us as H715, which is currently in Senate Natural Resources and Energy. So with that, Howard, thank you.
Thank you. And slides. All right, well, as you just heard, I've worked in a lot of places, but there's no place I'd rather be than in this building, frankly. I've had the pleasure of being here and working with the Vermont legislature on a few occasions in the past. And I just want to start by thanking you for your service. This is a great institution, and I have been in a number of them around the world, and I have to pinch myself when I get home about how it is to be here. So I was asked to speak to the clean heat standard and the bill that has come your way, H715. And I'm going to do that just for a few minutes, try to be quick, and then let you, ask questions, tell me what's on your mind, etc. The first, just hit this. Thank you. The first point, really, so the starting point is that, as you heard, I've worked in the electric power sector. I've paid attention to carbon trading and the European policies for cap and trade. A lot of different policies regarding energy conservation and climate emissions. And I start with the fact that fossil heat, that is how we heat and cool buildings, is close to being the toughest challenge that we face with respect to the energy world that we're in, and both the financial world that we're in and the environment and climate world that we're in. And so just quickly, Vermont, as you probably know, emissions associated with heat in Vermont are our second largest source of climate emissions, greenhouse gas pollution. It's 34% of the problem right after transportation. This is number 2. Under the Global Warming Solutions Act, we have set an ambitious goal and a responsible goal to reduce those emissions by 40% by 2030, 80% by 2050. It's a significant challenge. But as we've seen in the electric sector, it's we're capable of meeting such challenges. Also, the fossil heat bill is a huge burden on the state. When I started this conversation a year ago, the bill was like 750 million a year. I haven't checked it lately, but it's got to be over $1 billion this year that Vermont is exporting to buy fossil fuels for heat, not counting transportation. Fossil fuels for heat to import carbon, basically, that we don't want to emit. And so there needs to be a solution to this conundrum. We have, as you know, the housing stock in Vermont is old. I live in an old 1840s farmhouse. A lot of you probably live in similar places. And it doesn't turn over very fast. The automobile fleet turns over way faster than the housing fleet. And so to fix housing, you can't just say, well, we'll wait till the next generation. We have to fix the housing that's here. Next slide. Oh, and I will emphasize this last point. When you think about how to fix heat to make it less expensive and less polluting, those are kitchen table conversations, one by one. Individual business owners, building owners, homeowners have to make those decisions one at a time. This is not like some solutions, like automobile standards, where you can impose a standard on the manufacturer and the cars show up on the lot. Or even with the renewable standard for electricity, most homeowners don't have to do anything in order to get green electricity as we green up the grid. But building owners have to make these decisions. And so the message I'm delivering here is that the clean heat standard is designed from the customer up, not from the top down. So that's where we started this whole conversation when we gathered a group to consider creating the clean heat standard. Where do we get our heat from? 72% of our heat is fossil fuel. This isn't the bill, this is the BTUs. Fuel oil, natural gas, and propane are the three major sources. We need to deal with 72% of our heat. And we can do it. That's the good news. Next slide, Sally. This slide is really busy. I'm glad you have it in your hands. You can study it later, but I'm just going to point out the basics. Fossil heat is an expensive roller coaster. It's volatile. The price of oil and gas is volatile. These are these upper bars here that are spiky and going up and down. And they're more expensive than the clean heat solutions that we have available to us in Vermont. We have, at the bottom of this chart, steady prices for wood chips, wood heat, wood pellets, and electric heat pumps, all lower cost and more stable than the volatile fuels that we have relied on. And therefore, that's good news for us, because if we want to transition from these expensive and more polluting fuels to cleaner fuels, we can do so with actually lower costs overall. So what is the clean heat standard? What's in this legislation that's coming here? It is a performance standard. It would require wholesalers and importers of fossil heating fuels to deliver a gradually improving percentage of clean heat to Vermonters. The best analogy I can give for this is the renewable energy standard that we have in Vermont. Over a number of years, we required electric companies to create increasing percentages of renewable electricity to create or buy increasing percentages of renewable electricity, then put it into the power mix. And over time, we've gradually built up the amount of renewables, on the Vermont grid. That kind of performance standard is what we have in mind here for the clean heat standard. How do we measure that? We measure that at the customer level. We ask the question, like, what percentage of the heat that we're consuming comes from clean heat, low emitting, non-fossil heat? What percentage? And that percentage needs to rise over time. Now, we're going to talk about how we actually make that happen. But again, think about this as analogous to the utilities being required and then stepping up and doing it over time to add renewable electricity to the grid and to add energy efficiency in Vermont homes and businesses. There's two analogies there. We know how to do this. We know how to work with customers to deliver energy efficiency, and we know how to deliver clean electricity. The next slide. As part of my introduction, I don't think it was mentioned, I have been a member of the Vermont Climate Council and chair of what's called the Mitigation Committee. So the Climate Council was very involved at your direction in coming up with a climate action plan. The climate action plan includes, as one of its major recommendations, and in fact, according to most people's view, it's the single most important recommendation in the climate plan to reduce greenhouse pollution. The climate action plan specifically calls for implementation of a clean heat standard, and it calls for implementation of adoption of a clean heat standard by the legislature this session. The Climate Council was, committed to meeting the greenhouse mandates created in the Global Warming Solutions Act, and realized that in order to do that, we actually have to get going, and we should start with a clean heat standard this year. Next slide. I've said that it's pretty daunting. 72% of our heat is coming from fossil fuels. We need to get off of those fossil fuels, and we need to do it starting as soon as possible. And the question is, how fast do we need to go? So to put this in a little bit of perspective, the number that I've been using is that we need to improve heating in Vermont by about 4 to 5% per year. So we need to strip out about 4 to 5% of our fossil consumption, replace it with clean heat consumption every year. Now, 4 to 5% a year gives us a glide path. It gives fuel dealers a glide path, a way to change their business to deliver new services to their customers. It gives us generally new businesses an opportunity to start and know that over time they're going to see ever increasing demand for their services. So 4 to 5% a year glide path is, we've looked hard at this. We think that it's practical, implementable, and we wouldn't be recommending it if we did not think that. So this particular chart is showing you how many weatherization jobs, how many hot water heater heat pumps, how many cold climate air source heat pumps we would need in the state in order to. And this last one is pellet stoves. But I think the potential for advanced wood heat is probably greater than that. But you get the idea that these are numbers that we can live with and we can achieve. I'm going to reiterate this point. There is good news here in that a lot of these solutions are affordable, and in many cases, they're cheaper than what we're doing now. It's cheaper than sending our money to Texas or Saudi Arabia or wherever it's going. You can look at these numbers later. Go on. Back to the idea of a performance standard. The performance standards have been used all across the country to deliver energy efficiency, to deliver renewable electricity, and increasingly, there are examples like the low carbon fuel standard in 3 Western states. Colorado has adopted a clean heat standard for its natural gas company. There are a lot of other people looking at a performance standard to address the heating problem. Next slide. Okay. People often ask, well, okay, clean heat. You've said that term. I've probably said it 20 times already. What is clean heat? We measure clean heat by looking, as I said, we need to replace fossil sources of heat with cleaner sources of heat. And that happens in individual buildings. So what we need to do really is to measure what's going on in individual buildings. And so I'm referring here to clean heat measures, just to make it real. These are real things that would happen in your home, my home, and my neighbor's homes. How it would work is that this legislation requires the PUC and the Department of Public Service, assisted by a technical advisory group, to create a standard and implement it more or less the way they have done for energy efficiency, renewable electricity. And the requirement would be on entities called obligated parties. The obligated parties in this bill are the fossil fuel importers and wholesalers who are bringing those fossil fuels into Vermont. And they would be required to reduce, they would be required to deliver to Vermont homes and businesses clean heat solutions at a fraction, increasing fraction every year. So in proportion to their sales. So a big seller, a big wholesaler of fossil fuels would have a bigger obligation than a smaller business. Now, how do they satisfy that obligation? They satisfy that obligation by in a variety of ways. We wanted to be very practical about this. We wanted to make it clear that there are a lot of different ways to go here. And customers ultimately get to decide. No, this bill does not require customers to do anything. Customers can choose. Do they want to ask their fuel dealer to deliver biofuels into their tank, burn it in their furnace? Do they want heat? Maybe they want a heat pump. They prefer to have a heat pump. Maybe they would prefer a wood chip boiler or a pellet stove. Weatherization counts. District heating would count if it's renewable. There are a lot of different ways to improve heat in Vermont that we all know are available. It's existing technology. And we could choose to do that in our homes and businesses. Anyone can deliver the measures. So this is people asked me at the beginning, are we going to require that the fuel dealer is the only one who can deliver the measure? The answer is no. That's not the point of this legislation. The point of this legislation is to improve heat in Vermont, period. So if an HVAC contractor installs a heat pump, they can earn clean heat credits. If the CAP agency weatherizes a home, it earns clean heat credits. If a power company delivers a heat pump, it can earn clean heat credits. So you can envision lots of competition out there for people to go to customers and say, hey, I've got a solution for you. I can get you off of your oil heat or your propane. We really made this kind of an open door policy. in order to create competition and choice. Next slide. And while we're at it, we need to focus on equity. The transition that we are going through with the Global Warming Solutions Act is one that quite explicitly needs to be fair to all Vermonters. And the design of the clean heat standard and what's in H715 is very strong on that. There are a lot of different ways to address this problem, but one way is to make sure that a progressive fraction of clean heat solutions will come from low and moderate income households. So the obligated parties will have a reason to make sure that the low and moderate income Vermonters that they would like to serve are being given these clean heat options. Next slide. I'm getting towards the end here. I just want to point out some design features that turn out to be really important, and we often get questions about these. How do you compare propane heat, let's say, to biofuel? And like, how much credit does that switch get you? Or how do you compare a pellet stove to a propane system? From a global warming perspective and from the point of view of the Global Warming Solutions Act, what we're counting are emissions. And so we want to know on a life cycle basis, what's the greenhouse gas contribution from what's in place today, and compare that to what would the emissions be on a life cycle basis from the switch that we're making. If we're weatherizing the home, what's the reduction? If we're switching from one source to another, what's the reduction? You only get credit for the difference, because that's what the Solutions Act is asking us to do. They're saying we want to see 40% lower emissions, greenhouse gases from the heating sector. So now the good news about this is that there's a lot of science in the world that has studied these things. This is not something Vermont has to make up. The national labs, Argonne National Lab, National Renewable Energy Lab, the IPCC, they all have models that will tell you that if you switch out a gallon of fuel oil for a gallon of soy-based biodiesel, this is what you'll save. You know, we don't have to do that science. We can, and the legislation refers to the standards that could be used by the PUC in giving those credits. We are really focused on keeping costs low. I've mentioned this a couple of times. Customers get to choose. No customer is required to do anything in this legislation. If they are offered a choice that they like, just like today, I could choose to install a pellet stove or a heat pump in my house. It's my choice. And if they do, then some clean heat credits can be earned. Maybe the installer will ask me to turn over the clean heat credits and give me a discount. It's normally how it works. But the point is, there's lots of options for the customers. And the system only works if customers choose them, but we think customers will. And I'm going to emphasize this point again. This is not about some theoretically wonderful cap-and-trade program where we're going to plant trees in China and take credit for it in Vermont. This is, you only get clean heat credits under this legislation if something happens here in Vermont to reduce our global warming pollution. And that's what we're measuring. So that sometimes I get asked these like really interesting and difficult questions about, well, will I get credit for doing something somewhere else? And isn't that a good thing? And my answer is, it might be a good thing. I don't know. But what we're doing in this legislation is improving heat for Vermonters. That's where we want to see the benefits. And the good news is that we have a lot to build on. We're already doing energy efficiency. We have a advanced wood heat program in Vermont, which actually demonstrates the point that these technologies work, and Vermonters frequently really like them. We have the utility tier 3 program. We have a weatherization program. All of those actions will earn clean heat credits. So the umbrella that we're creating here allows all of those actions to earn credits. And to the degree that those credits have any market value, they can be paid for them. But we're not competing with each other. Well, I'm going to say that a little differently. Providers will compete with each other to get customers, which is what we want. To the degree that they save and lower emissions, then they'll earn credits. The credits will count towards the clean heat standard, which is something that we want statewide. And we don't care whether it came from a heat pump or it came from a hot water heat pump or whether it came from a weatherization job. What we care is how many tons did it avoid. And obviously customers would have chosen it in order for it to be installed in the first place. Maybe I should stop pretty soon here. Let's go to the next slide and see what's left. Okay, I just said this, focus on customers. And it's where I started is the importance of making sure that this works for Vermont enterprises. That is, we need people who are offering services to show up at those kitchen tables and to offer solutions to Vermonters. And that's how change is going to happen. So the fuel dealers, and I've been saying this to the Matt Goda and the Fuel Dealers Association and what have you, been trying to make the point with them that this is a glide path on fossil for you, and it's an escalator for the new business model that you need to survive in a low carbon world. You can't just be selling fuel oil forever. You need to, and a lot of them are doing this, so you need to learn how to install heat pumps and sell biofuels and pellet stoves and what have you. There's a lot of room in the heating world to deliver different services. We didn't try to pick winners. You've heard me say many times, weatherization, heat pumps, pellet stoves, biofuels. There's a lot of different ways to deliver cleaner heat. I don't have a crystal ball. People talk to me about green hydrogen. Well, maybe green hydrogen will show up someday. I don't know. But the point is that since I don't have that crystal ball, and because customers have a lot of different opinions, I have friends who hate heat pumps. I have friends who love pellet stoves. I have people who love their heat pumps who have talked to me about how great they are. Customers can choose. And we can build in equity from the beginning. And I'm going to go back to where I started. We've seen that this performance standards can work for electricity. I believe that they can work for heat also. And I'm happy to take questions. Please.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Rich, right at the beginning, we have a lot of old stock. And you and I, all of us know many people that live in the old stock homes. And they're the very people that probably are having the hardest time to do their heating. And, you know, if you're 75 years old, you know, you're living on a certain amount of money. How many of those people are going to want to spend 10, 8, 10, $12,000 to put heat pumps in that in the old stock don't really help much below 20 degrees? So how do we deal with those folks?
So first of all, let me just say, I love your question. I live in one of those homes.
Yeah, you're there.
I personally experience it. So I'm going to give you like a 3-part answer. One part is this is a gradual thing. Everybody's not going to be converting immediately. Number 2, there are lots of options here, and I can speak to this personally too, that, you know, I heat my house mostly with wood, and I decided to get a pellet stove and the pellet stove works really well. And so we have that option. In fact, under the clean heat standard and advanced wood stove, EPA certified high efficiency wood stove would qualify for clean heat credits under this program. And just as pellet stove does. The third is that certainly during the transition period, I would expect some fraction of people to simply put some biofuels in their tank, burn it in their existing furnace. And that's a relatively easy switch. And then finally, I would say for the worst performing house, the worst quality housing that's the coldest to be in the winter, we need to have a weatherization program that really goes and helps those people to improve their homes. I don't see any point in putting heat pumps in leaky buildings. And the dealers I've talked to agree with that. They wouldn't recommend it. So part of the approach taken by the Climate Council, and I expect will be taken by this body, is to make sure that we have a ramped up weatherization program that targets low income and moderate income housing, the worst housing stock, the most energy burdened consumers, and that we work on the weatherization side of it while we work on the clean heat side of it. They go hand in hand.
And I believe that's what we're working on. And we have a huge.
I believe you are. And then the Climate Council recommended that. I feel really strongly about it. The people working on weatherization agree that we need to link up the weatherization and the clean heat. Ideally, we would be helping customers do both at the same time. Now, some customers might not want the whole package, so that's okay. But I have one concern that I want to share with you about weatherization. I have been a fan of weatherization forever, and I've been in this body promoting weatherization forever. But from a greenhouse gas perspective, weatherization can only reduce the heat load of the building by about 25%. So I think a lot of people have the idea that we can weatherize our way to meeting the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements, but we can't. It has to be weatherization in the units that need it the most, and clean heat pretty much everywhere.
If I could, I just wanted to pick up on Bobby's question, because it seems to me built in is the idea, you talked a lot about choice, which I think is great, and in our roles, that helps us sell a bill that emphasizes choice.
Mhm.
But what do you do if that choice isn't taken up by the requisite number of people? Maybe the low-hanging fruit in the first couple of years is there just from enough people who are energized and motivated to make the switch. Has your group contemplated that wall that we might hit where choice is not doing it? And then is that a sort of path that we'll take when we come to it? Or how do you think about that potential failure of choice?
I think that somebody will be back here talking to you about it, but we did not, there's nothing built into this legislation that says if enough people don't pick up on these changes, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have some mandate or something like that. It's not in this legislation. I'm familiar with a program in the United Kingdom where the utilities were obligated to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the customer base. And at first, they were able to, people signed up and they were able to go into people's homes. And the quality of the housing stock in the UK is surprisingly bad. Americans are surprised to learn that. Cold homes, drafty homes. And they would go in and there would be no insulation in these homes. And at first, they would offer a deal to the customers. You know, we'll help you insulate your home. Customers would pay for a bunch of it. And as time went by, they ran out of customers who were willing to pay. And so they had to really knock on doors. And they had to get really creative. They would go up and down a block in a city neighborhood and try to get everybody on the block to sign up for the weatherization program. And then have a crew out there just going down the block. They got creative in order to overcome those barriers.
We have about 2 minutes, and I
Okay.
know Ginny has a question, and then we need to end because House of Ops is coming back in.
I'm going to the kitchen table and and also to the dealers who are now converting themselves to a new business model and thinking about the costs. And right now, gas is regulated, electricity is regulated, but wood chips are not, and our other fuel sources are not regulated. And how is will the competition alone, you're expecting is going to keep the costs down? Or will there be some new regulatory environment that helps customers make decisions that long-term help? And there's a lot more in that, because thinking about how the fuel dealers are going to convert and what upfront investment they're going to need to make some of those changes. A lot there, I think.
So yeah, there's a lot there. I would say right now, I'm not worried about inflationary pressures on wood heat. There's an open question about would there be inflationary pressures on biofuels. But Vermont, we've heard from a lot of biofuels providers, and they were very upbeat about Vermont's a small enough market. They don't think we're going to really spike the price. And then in the final analysis, I think as time goes by, we're going to find out that we need to provide financing mechanisms to help people convert. And that's what we're talking about with the weatherization program.
Right.
And so the same kind of financing program that will help people weatherize can be used to help them convert their heating systems. We roll that together, my opinion.
Well, thank you, Rich. This is a great beginning. We may have you back. we may need you further. I know that Senate Natural is hoping to get this bill out by the end of the week. I applaud them on that effort because it's a big thorny bill.
Yeah,
So
so
thank you very much for your help introducing it to us. So we'll
it's my pleasure.